an officer?
You know, I understand and appreciate the comment that you made and why you said it. But if I were to answer that question, I'd be contradicting what I said a moment ago, which is to say that all employees are entitled to due process, and after that due process, discipline will be determined. If I were to say anything else, I would actually be contradicting the idea of due process.
One final question. What's your expectation for how a significantly white police force here in Brooklyn Center treats the black and brown members of this community? What expectation have you communicated down to the chief and to the officers under him for how they are to interface with the vast majority, because the vast majority of this population is black and brown? How have you communicated to them to interface and interact with people who look like me?
Absolutely, I've communicated that to the chief, and I do believe that the chief concurs with the notion that every resident of Brooklyn Center must be treated fairly, must be treated equitably. The city council has been very clear in its expectations about fairness and equity. We are implementing this year an Office of Anti-Racism Principles and Practices. We are hiring an equity officer in the next several weeks. The city council has provided specific direction about accountability for the police department and transparency for the police department. We've been providing reports to the city.
Talk to us about the
city council. Yes, we're providing reports to the city council about officer discipline, about information on stops, of black and brown people or people of color in the city of Brooklyn Center. We're developing some task forces to assess if any of our
immediately to send a message that this type of behavior will not be condoned within the city of Brooklyn Center.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments.
Should an officer who can't tell the difference between a taser and a handgun, should they go out in a vehicle with both items in their car?
It really wouldn't be appropriate for me to respond to that.
Why would it not be appropriate, sir?
Because I can't make that judgment.
So as a supervisor of the police force, were you part of the decision last night to use tear gas on our youth who were protesting yesterday? And rubber bullets?
I was not.
Mr. City Manager, Mr. Mayor, when I asked that question about the firing of the police officer, the police chief left.
Yeah.
What is that an indication of? Is he dealing with something perhaps more important, or is that some type of silent protest? Because he left immediately.
I can't speculate.
Mr. Mayor, you have a comment?
I do not know why the excuse me.
Does that bother you without knowing why that he just walked out?
I do not know why the chief left. I can only speculate as to why he left at the time that he did.
Does it bother you?
What would your speculation be?
I don't have any speculation. I mean, it's possible that the chief takes a position perhaps similar to the city manager, that there needs to be some kind of a process, or I don't know. I mean, I would only.
What was the conversation between you and the chief? What was that conversation between you and the chief when you shared with the chief that you'd like to see this officer terminated? He didn't tell us anything.
The police office, and what is the normal protocol? What is the process for who decides, and how does that decision happen? And then were those protocols and that process followed last night?
All right. So I will have the city manager and the chief speak on that, but I'll speak first. My role becomes active the moment that I declare a state of emergency, and if the city council acts to give the mayor authority over the police, or under their circumstances, if there's a declaration of martial law. And so my role really is one of influence in those situations. I cannot give commands to the department. I cannot instruct the police chief to take certain actions or not to take certain actions. The person who can do that is the city manager. And so in terms of what the person who can do that is the city manager. And so in terms of what the protocols are and for handling protests. I imagine the chief will be coming back to join us and speak on that.
Involved shooting. What happens is I have no contact with that investigation because I don't want to taint that investigation. People can say they scoff at that. I looked at this video, which is unprecedented. I don't know if any chief has done that very often or has looked at that video in advance of that. Sometimes you can't unwatch a video. So hold on, let me finish. Let me finish, please. So what I'm saying is I have limited information. I'm not trying to be disingenuous, but I'm trying to stay away from the investigation. I wish the BCA was here, but again, they probably tell you the same thing, that there's not much they can do because it's an early investigation. Now, please, one question at a time. Yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We really demand to know the information of the officer involved in the shooting.
Okay. The first question is we do have a process in place, and that's leaning on the BCA to do their investigation. Every shooting that I've seen, every shooting that I've witnessed has been different. Every circumstance is different around every shooting. It's tragic every time. The loss of life is obviously tragic, but there are different circumstances around every situation. In this particular situation, it was very important for me to get that video out as quickly as possible, and that's what I did.
Chief, absolutely unprecedented. I lived in Minnesota 7 years, worked here. Can you just tell us a little bit about how long the officer was on the force here in Brooklyn Center? Was she around when Barway was pulled from the body of water 6 years ago today?
The information on the officer is she's a very senior officer. That's the extent that I can do. A very senior officer, and I do believe that the BCA will be releasing all the information, training records, everything that they have. They'll be releasing that. That's public data. That'll be coming out shortly.
And Chief, what is the normal protocol and process for response to protesters and was that protocol and process followed last night?
There was strict adherence to the policy of working with the protest.
The lights off. What was your thinking about turning off the lights in the midst of people coming and
Sure.
attempting to redress
Sure.
At the police station? What was your decision behind turning off all the lights?
I don't know about the lights on the street, but I know the building lights were turned off because they created a backlighting for the officers that were on the front lines. They became targets for concrete blocks, frozen cans that I personally saw and ducked. So that's what I turned those lights off. So that
turning off the lights made them less of targets? Or?
Yes, they weren't backlit. So then the people that were in front, they couldn't see it. So if we have lights in front of us, that's what the police department would like to have. We'd like to be looking out forward, not behind us, because then you get backlit.
So the lights that I'm talking about were all around. So the lights were all around the front part of the building. The police were well behind that, but it just created an entire darkness around. It seemed very unusual for a station to have all the lights off, including the lights all in the streets, to create utter darkness and a lot of confusion and a real ominous kind of mood. And I would say that it's very unusual. I've been to a lot of police stations. I've been to a lot of police stations. I've been to a lot of protests. I've been to a lot of these type of events. I have never seen the police department utterly
with frozen cans of pop. They were being belted with concrete blocks. And yes, we had our helmets on and we had other protection gear, but an officer was injured, hit in the head with a brick. That was a Hennepin County deputy. He was transported to the hospital. So we had to make decisions. We had to disperse the crowd because we can't allow our officers to be harmed. And I've already answered the question, I believe, about your lighting. I know that's a big deal with you, and I understand that, but I thought I've explained that myself. So that is, I told you it's my decision, and that's why I made that decision. Is there another question? Yes, ma'am.
I mean, the room's tense. I can feel it.
Yes, ma'am.
What is on your heart? Let him answer, guys.
Sure.
Speak to us for real. Like, keep it 100.
This is what I'm here for. Okay? I'm the leader of this department. They expect me to lead, to create a safe city. That's what I'm trying to do. So that's it.
I hope you're not crying, too.
Okay? And, yeah, I'm emotional.
Guys, he's being honest.
I'm just trying to be honest. So.
When I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
When you asked the protesters to take a step back across the street, what was the reasoning for, after they went across the street, you shot tear gas grenades and flashbangs where the people were across the street where you had originally told them to be?
Sure. The only time that we return, in every situation, absolutely not. We had a situation We had a situation where we were bringing in an arrest team, and we were worried. How many people are we going to arrest? When we started to move the people, finally, hours into the situation, you know how many people we arrested that stayed? 2 people. If we hadn't done that, if we hadn't moved people along, I don't know what would have happened. And I don't know where they would have reformed. But the people that left were allowed to leave. We didn't trap them. We didn't make mass arrests. We arrested 2 people.
So what are the plans for tonight?
Tonight we're going. If it's a peaceful protest, if it's a First Amendment protest, go to it.
I guess what's your
We'll
definition of a peaceful protest? Because we don't understand.
Yeah, not being pelted with bricks, blocks, and being targeted.
What we saw yesterday were young people up with their hands up.
Yeah.
And they were being tear gassed. And you were talking about your officers being hurt. We can count how many people got hurt yesterday too.
Okay.
So that's what I'm going to ask again. Are you planning on doing things differently tonight?
We are going to have our officers lined up to protect this building, to protect the city as best we can. That's what we're going to do today, and that's what we do every day.
I got one more question. When the officers were firing tear gas and flashbangs, there was an apartment complex with families behind it, and that's where a lot of the flashbangs were going. Had a flashbang went into one of those windows and started that building on fire, it put a lot of other people at risk.
Okay.
Why?
I didn't see any flashbang that was very close to those apartments. 1400, 67th, I was there. I didn't see anybody.
6700.
40, 6740.
Right overhead, over the building.
Okay.
And we saw that last night.
And I didn't see that myself.
Final question. So, Police Chief, we hear that you have committed to protecting this building and protecting the city tonight if there are protests. Will you commit to protecting protesters and the people of this city?
I am committed to protecting the peaceful protesters of the city every day.
Not yesterday.
Peaceful protesters.
I was peaceful protesters,
Yeah.
and they were targeting me.
Okay.
All right. So thank you, everybody. Just to reiterate, my commitment, our commitment as a city, and in many ways we need to recommit to that. That is to making sure that we are protecting peaceful protesters. We're protecting the rights of people to gather and grieve and give their grievances to the government. And so we're going to work to continue to protect those rights, protect peaceful protesters, and to make sure that we're also securing the safety of our community. Securing the safety of our community. Thank you.
Understand that when peaceful protesters gather and they are met with violence, that things are going to escalate, and at that point you can't blame them and call them rioters?
Confidence, self-belief and a sense of achievement. All values that we should cherish, all values that make a difference. Long may that scheme flourish in his memory. Madam Deputy Speaker, we've been discussing amongst ourselves over the weekend and in the tea room the contribution that His Royal Highness has made individually and collectively. And my honourable friend, the member for Feltham and Heston, who can't be in the chamber today, also shared with me the impact that the Duke of Edinburgh scheme has had on the confidence of young people from poorer backgrounds in her constituency. She asked me to mention this. And also the sense of grief that is shared across the community for an exceptional man who gave so much and never sought the credit for all the lives he positively changed. That's reflected in my own constituency. The people of Chester have been remembering the Duke over the weekend. On Facebook, we saw these fantastic photos from 1953 when he came to open Coronation Park playing fields, not far from where I live. I know how grateful over the years Chester Zoo has been for the support of the Duke and for his promotion of conservation and the work of the zoo across a global stage. The high-profile support that the Duke would give to the zoo's work added credibility and got it noticed. And as we've heard, he was years ahead of his time, and frankly, the years ahead of the rest of us, in his dedication to preserving the natural world. But I wish to focus finally on that constancy that he has given to the Queen and the nation and the Commonwealth and the world. 73 years of marriage is a lifetime, yes, but it's actually hard to visualise what 73 years means. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, consider this. Her Majesty married Prince Philip in 1947 and she ascended the throne in 1952. In other words, they'd already been married for 16 years by the time the Beatles released Please Please Me, and they married over 20 years when Armstrong and Aldrin first walked on the moon. All the history that has flown down the river of life in those 73 years, the massive cultural change, the political change across the globe, and here in this chamber, which is in representation of the people within it and in its physical form, is different since the time of Attlee and Churchill. During all of that change and during the entire lives of most of the population of the UK, there have been but two constants. Our Queen on the throne, providing an anchor of certainty, a rock of dependability for the nation to rally around, and His Royal Highness Prince Philip by her side, offering the same foundation of certainty and reliability to her and to us all, as everything around us changed at often breakneck pace. There's a phrase in English derived from cricket which we know the Duke loved. He had a good innings. Well, at 99 years old, he did have a good innings in the sense of a long life, but his innings was much more than that. We can be clear, and with each tribute made in this house and across the country, we learn more, that his was a life of quality, service, loyalty, dignity, humour, and indeed innovation. So on behalf of my constituents in Chester, I send my condolence to Her Majesty and all the royal family for their personal loss, but I also send my thanks for Prince Philip and for a life of service well lived. It is an example we can all aspire to.
We now go to Andrew Rosendale.
Madam Deputy Speaker, may I join members on all sides of the House today to give thanks for the life and service of His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Prince Philip was a man who dedicated his entire life to duty. Duty to his wife, Her Majesty the Queen, duty to his country, and duty to all nations of the Commonwealth. In this, the longest reign of any monarch in British history and across these islands, the Duke of Edinburgh was always there, by the Queen's side, defending and upholding the crown, whilst at the same time showing his devotion to the people of this country through his work for so many wonderful causes, charities, the armed forces, sports, the arts, and of course, to the protection of our natural environment and of wildlife in particular. He was a good man, a man of character, integrity, courage, and patriotism. And so, on behalf of my constituents of Romford, I would like to offer my heartfelt sympathies to Her Majesty the Queen at this huge loss to herself and the entire royal family. A service of thanksgiving for the life of His Royal Highness will be held at the Church of St Edward the Confessor in Romford Market later this week. And it is a church that Prince Philip and the Queen visited way back on the 3rd of March 2003, following on from Her Majesty's Golden Jubilee tour of the United Kingdom. I remember the day well. Upon their arrival in Romford Market, Her Majesty and the Duke of Edinburgh were greeted with rapturous applause from the people of my town, and I had the pleasure of spending time with the Queen and His Royal Highness as the then new Member of Parliament for Romford, escorting them around our historic market town, meeting stallholders and local people, followed by community representatives and a lunch in the church hall, the Wickham Hall. Prince Philip had time for everyone. He showed enormous interest in all things that were important to others, and with a great sense of humour at all times. And also, as chairman of the British Irish Parliamentary Assembly, may I pay tribute to His Royal Highness for the part he played in the Queen's state visit to Ireland in May of 2011, which he did so much to help bring our two nations together, strengthening that bond of friendship between all peoples across these blessed islands of ours. May I also pay tribute to His Royal Highness for his lifelong support for the 21 British overseas territories and crown dependencies, the Duke having visited so many of them over his lifetime. And I especially recall that wonderful day in July of 2002 at Tynwald Hill on the Isle of Man, where the Queen and Prince Philip came for the magnificent annual ceremony celebrating the Manx tradition of Tynwald Day, and I was proud to be there myself. The Duke of Edinburgh was indeed a man who made the most of his long life, but he did so in the service of his family, his country, and the Crown. We owe him so much. Thank you, Prince Philip. God save the Queen.
We now go to Rosie Duffield.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a privilege to join with colleagues across the House today in paying tribute to His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh on behalf of my constituents in Canterbury. Obviously, first and foremost, he'll be greatly missed by his family, but it's clear from the many tributes that he will also be greatly missed by the British people as the nation's grandfather too. Prince Philip was an independent spirit. Many of us here in this House may be able to relate to that a little, who used his position to stand up for causes that he believed so passionately in. From as early as the 1950s and into the 60s, when he became president of the World Wildlife Fund, he promoted environmental causes such as air pollution at a time when it was far from fashionable to do so. In 1970, in a speech to the Australian Conservation Foundation, he said, "The conservation of nature, the proper care for the human environment, and a general concern for the long-term future of the whole of our planet are absolutely vital if future generations are to have a chance to enjoy their existence on this earth." Words that resonate strongly today. And while some have reported that he believed strongly that it should not be politicised, in raising our awareness of the natural world around us, the plight of endangered species, and the greenhouse effect, he got so many of us to sit up and take seriously the future of the planet when, as Sir David Attenborough put it, the majority of people were quite unaware that we were heading for ecological disaster. Of course, we must also pay tribute to his work for young people. The Duke of Edinburgh's awards scheme, which he launched in 1956, has given many thousands of young people from all backgrounds, including my own children, the opportunity to develop essential skills for life and work and lifelong memories. Prince Philip had a long-standing relationship with Kent, in particular with our wonderful Canterbury Cathedral. And of course, anyone passing through the west door to the cathedral now passes under a statue of the Duke of Edinburgh standing next to the Queen, which was unveiled in 2015. And yesterday, the Archbishop of Canterbury led a service and paid tribute to him there. Prince Philip led a remarkable life. From his service to the Royal Navy during the Second World War, fighting against fascism, to his 7 decades of public service through his marriage to our Queen, his legacy will live on, including his championing of environmental causes and as a very early adopter of the idea of electric vehicles. I'd like to end with the words of Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, yesterday, reminding us of the very personal bereavement to his family. We all know that it is not simply a factor of age or familiarity. It is not obliterated by the reality of a very long life remarkably led, nor is the predictability of death's arrival a softening of the blow. loss is loss. And all of our thoughts and prayers are with the family as they come to terms with their enormous loss. Thank you.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton Brown.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for allowing me to take part in this series of heartfelt tributes to His Royal Highness Prince Philip. On behalf of my Cotswolds constituents, who I have the honour to represent, my sincere condolences go to Her Majesty the Queen on the very sad loss of her devoted husband and consort of over 70 years. His Royal Highness Prince Philip was a husband, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, who will be hugely missed, not only by his huge family, but by the country he served so loyally and many members of the Commonwealth throughout the world. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, and indeed my right honourable and gallant friend, mentioned the Duke's distinguished war record. His generation endured the suffering of war, where the bravery of our armed forces meant that Prince Philip hugely respected them for the rest of his life. It was this early experience of sacrifice and duty that reinforced his dedication to Her Majesty the Queen and the nation he served so loyally throughout his long life. There is no doubt that Her Majesty the Queen's enormously successful and long reign has been considerably assisted by the Duke's constant loyalty and wise counsel. However, he has earned his own place in the history of the British nation for his achievements in helping young people through his worldwide Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme, a legacy of more than 60 years. And there's nothing more important than developing the skills and opportunities for young people, here and abroad, which included his presidency of the National Playing Fields Association, now known as the Fields in Trust. The Duke was also a very early champion of the environment, helping to form the Australian Conservation Foundation, and as many members have said, helping Peter Scott form the World Wildlife Fund. I, amongst many other colleagues, had the honour of meeting Prince Philip at a garden party where we had a short conversation about our shared interests in the countryside, farming and the environment. As my right honourable friend for Gainsborough said, he had a deep thinking mind and he realised that the whole of the natural world is interconnected. If you damage it in one place, it comes out somewhere else. So he was a no-nonsense, humorous and down-to-earth person who characteristically requested not to have a state funeral. He was always there on an important occasion, and his death means there is now an irreplaceable void in our nation's affairs. But his legacy and foresight will continue to live on. May he rest in peace.
Chris Elmore.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. To start, my thoughts and prayers are first and foremost with Her Majesty the Queen and all members of the royal family. We must remember that for any of us who have experienced loss, he is first and foremost a father, grandfather and great-grandfather. And on behalf of my Ogmore constituents, I pay tribute to his service throughout these last 70 years as consort to Her Majesty. Many members have spoken about the Duke of Edinburgh Award, and I make no apology for repetition, but I wish to speak more about the fact of the impact that had on young people when I was a Cabinet Member for Education in a different local authority than what I now represent in Parliament, and the impact that that had on those young people. I was privileged during my 4.5 years in that particular role to meet young people who achieved bronze, silver and gold, some of whom got to gold obviously after achieving bronze and silver, but they were from some of the most poorest communities and the most wealthiest, the least deprived, the most deprived, the full cross-spectrum of young people you could ever wish to meet. And the extraordinary thing about the award was that it didn't matter where they were from, they were all working towards a common goal. And the joy of seeing young people travelling to London, some young people who would never have the option to travel to London, never have the opportunity to travel outside of their small community of which they'd lived their whole lives. And the Duke of Edinburgh Award gave them that freedom, that inspiration to do something. I met more young people that went on to university from deprived communities because of the Duke of Edinburgh Award, who arguably, through their own parents' comments, would never have done that if it wasn't for the award. That is a legacy that I hope the royal family, and indeed the Queen, will look back on and think of that small idea in the 1950s and the success of those so many young people that have now achieved and what they've gone on to achieve in adulthood and beyond. I'm a very proud member, Madam Deputy Speaker, of the Executive Committee of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. And when you look at the figures, His Royal Highness, between 1949 and 2016, did 229 visits to 67 Commonwealth nations without the Queen. So, on top of all the additional visits he did around the Commonwealth, he was a great believer in the Commonwealth. And he, not just through his patronages or visits to different countries around the Commonwealth, he worked to ensure that the Commonwealth adapted and grew into the family of nations that it is today. And it's quite clear from the collective grief around the Commonwealth the impact that he had as the Queen's consort and as a great supporter of the Commonwealth of Nations that so many of us are proud to have association with today. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, so many members have talked of service. Service to Her Majesty the Queen as consort, service to our country. But the one thing that many people have commented about today that not everyone knew about His Royal Highness is his service in the armed forces. The bedrock of his service to this country as a refugee when he first came here at the instructions of King George VI and King George V when there was evacuations from Greece for the Greek royal family. His service began because he was grateful to the support that he had received from this country. Serving in the armed forces meant that he had a bedrock of commitment to this country that most of us now could only envy. He saw serving in the military. He saw taking a step back when the Queen became our Queen at such a young age as being his raison d'etre for life, of ensuring that the Queen had the support to do her job. And I hope that as the Queen and the royal family look back on his life, as all grieving